They found a dome of jawbones. Not scattered where the animals had died, not abandoned after a hunt. Built. Jawbones fitted together into a ring, each slotted into the next like the courses of a wall. Shoulder blades set as panels. Tusks and long bones rising above them like the frame of a roof. Not sheltered in. Not crawled into. Designed. Gathered. Engineered. By people who knew which bone would bear weight and which would crack, and fitted them so the wall would hold against a wind that could kill a person in an hour. One jaw weighed more than a child. Somebody dragged it across frozen ground, then went back and did it again. More than 20 mammoths worth until the ring closed. His hands would have split at the knuckles, his back would have gone, and when he finished, he had built a thing that could not be picked up and carried when the herds moved on. Inside, a hearth. Around it, the debris of daily life. Someone lived here. Someone came back to this place, night after night, and called it theirs. And the moment you accept that, a question opens under your feet that is much older and much harder than it looks. Because if this was a home, then when, exactly, did the first one get built? When did our kind stop merely surviving the night and start making a place to return to? We think we already know how this goes. We think, cave. The picture is fixed in us. A family huddled in a stone mouth, firelight on rock, the ancestral address of the whole species. It is one of the most misleading images we carry, and it survives for an embarrassing reason. Caves preserve things. Bone and ash and tools survive in a dry cave for 100,000 years, while everything left in the open rots, blows away, or dissolves into the soil within a season. We think our ancestors lived in caves because caves are the only place we can still find them. The world is not made of caves. Walk the ground these people actually walked. The open steppe of the Ice Age, the river valleys, the plains that ran to the horizon under a sky the color of iron. And there is no stone hollow waiting anywhere. There is grass and wind and the cold. Most of the people who ever lived in the deep past had no cave to go to. They lived out under that sky, and they lived there for hundreds of thousands of years, and the question of how they did it is a question we have been quietly avoiding because the evidence rotted away before we ever got to it. So the Mammoth Bone Dome is not a curiosity, it is a survivor, the rare thing that lasted, in a landscape where nothing was supposed to last. Which means it is not the beginning of the story. It is a late chapter of one, and the earlier chapters are missing. To understand why anyone would drag half a herd's worth of bone across frozen ground, stand outside on that plain for one night without walls. The cold on the open steppe in deep winter is not weather, it is a subtraction. It takes the feeling from your fingers first, then the strength from your hands, then the sense from your thinking, and it does all of this while you are simply lying still, doing nothing wrong. A body loses heat to the ground beneath it faster than to the air above. Wind strips warmth away as fast as a fire can put it back. Fire alone does not save you out there. It warms one side of you while the other side freezes, and it eats wood you have to find in a place where trees are rare. And the dark had its own arithmetic. Sleep is the most defenseless thing a body does. Out in the open, with no wall to put your back against, the sleeping band was simply meat, arranged neatly on the ground, for anything that hunted by night. And every one of those hunters saw better in the dark than you did. So the wall was never a comfort. The wall was the difference between waking up and not. But the wall came with a price nobody talks about. To build one, you must stop moving. And people who stop moving in a world where the food walks away are people who have made a very dangerous bet. The trail back to the beginning does not start with a wall at all. It starts with something softer and far more human. In a rock shelter in South Africa, in layers reaching back around 77,000 years, they found bedding. Not a scatter of leaves. Bedding. Mats of sedge and rushes cut and laid down deliberately, in layers, to lift a sleeping body off the cold, hard, insect-crawling ground. And then it gets remarkable. Woven into those mats were the leaves of plants whose crushed foliage drives off mosquitoes and other biting insects. Somebody chose those plants. Somebody knew what they did. And when a mat grew old and filthy and infested, they did not simply abandon it. They burned it, deliberately, and laid down fresh bedding on top of the ash. Cleaning, housekeeping, 77,000 years ago, in a place we would call a cave, and they would have called something else entirely. That is not shelter. Shelter is a roof. This is care. The act of a person making a spot on the earth softer, safer, and cleaner than they found it, so that the people they loved could lie down, without waking up bitten and sick. The bed came before the house. The instinct came before the architecture. But a bed can be walked away from in the morning. What these people had not yet done, what would cost them far more than a night's work, was to build something they could not carry and then decide to stay. Follow one pair of hands into that decision, because this is where the whole thing turns human. Go back to the man on the open step, wind pulling at him, standing over the mammoth jaw. He has to move it. Not once. Dozens of times, across frozen ground, with the help of everyone strong enough to lift, until enough of them are ringed together to make a wall that will hold. That is the bet. That is the part nobody tells you about the first homes. Everything his people knew about staying alive said follow. Follow the reindeer. Follow the horse. Follow the season. Be light. Be quick. Own only what you can wear and carry on your body. To build was to argue with all of it. To build was to plant your family in one spot on a landscape that fed you by moving, and to gamble that the food would come to you, through that pass, along that river, past this particular curve of the land, often enough that you could afford to stand still. Look at where these bone houses actually sit, and you can feel him reading the ground. They cluster near rivers, in the folds and hollows where the wind breaks its own back. On the roots the herds had no choice but to take. He was not choosing a pleasant spot. He was choosing a place the world would keep delivering to, and he was betting his children's lives on having read it right. And the cost ran deeper than his spine. Every hour spent hauling bone was an hour not spent hunting. Every winter spent in one place was a winter emptying that place, of its firewood, its game, its clean water, until the land around the house grew thin, and the walk to everything got longer. To build was to spend the future for the present, on the faith that the present would hold long enough to be worth it. There was something else in it too, something he could not have named. Once the wall stood, the ground inside it stopped being ground. It became a place with an inside and an outside, the first time in the human story that a family could say here and mean somewhere that would still be here tomorrow. Everything we feel about a doorway, about coming back, about the particular relief of crossing a threshold out of the weather, begins in that ring of bone. He was not just building a wall. He was inventing the idea of returning. He hauled the jaw anyway, because inside that ring of bone, a child could sleep out of the wind. And here the trail behind him opens onto something that should not be there. At a lakeside site in Africa, in ground far older than our own species, reaching back around 400,000 years, they found two pieces of worked wood, notched, shaped, deliberately joined together at a right angle, one fitted into the other so they would hold. 400,000 years ago, long before anyone like us existed anywhere on Earth. Whatever those hands were making, a platform, a walkway, a floor raised above the wet ground, they had already grasped the idea that would eventually raise a dome of mammoth bone on a frozen plain, that the world can be taken apart and fitted back together into a shape that keeps you. The urge to build did not begin with us. We inherited it from someone else entirely, from a people whose name we do not know, and then spent the next 400,000 years forgetting they had ever held it first. Which makes what comes next the true test of everything he built, and it arrives screaming out of the dark. The wind comes ahead of the snow, and it comes with intent. Out on the exposed ground it stops being air and becomes a solid thing, a hand shoving the breath back down your throat, cold enough to take a finger in an hour and a life in 3. Anything caught out on that plain tonight is already finished, it simply does not know it yet. And the storm hits his ring of bone like a wave breaking over a rock. It holds. Inside, the difference is almost impossible to believe. The wind is a scream on the other side of the wall, tearing at the hides lashed over the frame, and in here, the air is still enough that the fire stands upright and burns clean. The bone shell has trapped a pocket of the world and refuses to give it back. The heat of the flame, the heat of the bodies, the warmth of everyone's breathing, all of it held in place, so that inside his house, it is not the step at all. It is a small warm world, made with his hands and everyone else's, existing in defiance of everything outside it. He lies with his back against the curved bone and feels the storm hammering the far side of a wall he built, and in that moment, he is doing something no other creature on that plain can do. Every animal out there tonight is enduring the storm, pressed into a hollow, muscles locked, waiting for it to pass over them. He is not enduring it. He has been excluded from it. He drew a line across the earth and put the killing world on the far side and his sleeping children on this one, and the line is holding, and it will still be holding at dawn. The The children sleep straight through it. They will never know how close the night came, and that ignorance is the finest thing he has ever given them. And the storm, which should have been the strongest argument in the world for the wall, was about to reveal exactly what that wall had cost him. The storm blew itself out sometime before dawn, and what came after was the strangest gift of all. An ordinary morning. She woke into it slowly. Firelight low and orange on the curved inner faces of the bone. The smell of old smoke soaked into everything. Someone's foot against her leg. The small sounds of a family that had slept the whole night through and was in no hurry to move. Outside, the world was rearranged by snow and murderous with cold, and it had nothing to do with them at all. This is the part of the story that never gets told, because nothing happens in it. Nobody died. Nobody fought anything. A woman lay in the warm dark inside a house made of mammoths, and listened to her children breathing, and did not, for the first time in her life, feel the weather in her bones. The whole of human effort up to that point, the fire, the bed, the wall, the hauling, the bed on the herds, had been spent to buy this exact nothing. An unremarkable morning. A body that woke up rested. A place you did not have to leave the moment the light came. That is what a home actually is. Not the roof, the dullness, the blessed unearned ordinariness of being somewhere that does not require anything of you. And there is a quieter thing folded inside that ordinariness. A creature that must move to survive can never fully rest. Some part of it stays awake even in sleep, ready to run, because the ground it lies on will not be its own tomorrow. What the wall gave her was permission to stop listening. For one night, the watchfulness every wild thing carries could be set down. The house did not just shelter her sleep, it gave her sleep back. And then she noticed what her hands were doing. She was tidying, sweeping the old ash to one side, moving a bone tool back to the place bone tools went. Nobody had told her to. Nothing depended on it. Without deciding to, she had started treating this ring of bone the way you treat a thing you intend to keep. And that small, unnecessary care was about to lead somewhere very dark. Because at some of these places, when they dug beneath the living surface, beneath the ash, the tools, the sleeping ground, they found the dead. Not thrown into a pit outside, not carried off and left to the cold. People buried inside the place where the family slept, under the floor, close enough that the living lay down each night above them. Sit with that. Everything we know says a corpse belongs outside. It draws scavengers. It carries sickness. Every practical instinct in that woman would have said, take it away from the children, take it away from the food, put it out beyond the wall. Instead, the dead were kept. Brought inside the line she had drawn between the world and her family, and laid beneath the very ground where her children slept. That is when a shelter stops being a shelter. A wall keeps the cold out. But the moment you carry your dead in, the moment you decide that being inside this ring of bone matters so much you cannot bear to leave your mother, your child, your husband on the other side of it, the wall has become something else. It has become a boundary of belonging. Inside is us. Inside is ours. And ours does not stop being ours, because it stopped breathing. The house had become the one place a family stayed together, even when death tried to divide it. The first home was not the first structure. It was the first place people refused to be separated from. But every line you draw has two sides, and the second one took a long time to reveal itself. The wall kept out the wind and the wolves. It also kept in everything the family carried: waste, parasites, the smoke of a fire burning in an enclosed space and settling into every set of lungs, night after night. The people who first slept indoors were also the first to breathe their own air until it hurt them. The bedding at that South African shelter was burned for a reason. A place you sleep in every night becomes, on its own, a place that bites you. And the deeper cost was not in the body, it was in the mind. Once you have a home, you have something that can be taken. A band that carried everything on its back could walk away from trouble. You cannot walk away from a house. She had built a thing worth defending, worth fighting over, worth killing for. And in the same motion she had invented the possibility of being driven out of it. Another band, arriving hungry at the same sheltered curve of the river, could take it, and she would have to choose between fleeing and fighting, because the one thing she could no longer do was simply move on. Somewhere in that ring of bone, along with the warmth and the belonging, a new fear was born that our species has never once put down since. Not the fear of the storm, the fear of losing the place that keeps you. And the answer to when all of this truly began, the real first home, was buried in ground far older than anyone had thought to look. Go back past the mammoth house, past the fitted wood at the lakeside, past the bedding laid down in careful layers to keep the biting things away in the night. Go back to a fire. Because when they dug into the oldest occupied caves and shelters on Earth, into layers reaching back hundreds of thousands of years, they found hearths. And the hearths were not scattered randomly across the floor the way you would expect from people who lit a fire wherever they happened to fall. They were placed near the center or set against a wall, in the one spot on that floor that actually made sense for the smoke and the draft and the sleeping bodies. And they were used again and again and again. Ash on ash on ash. The same patch of ground burned by generation after generation of people who kept coming back to it, long after the ones who first chose it were dust. Around some of those hearths, the debris sorts itself out. Tools worked in one area, food processed in another, the sleeping space kept clear of the sharp litter of the day. A place with regions. A place with rules that everyone knew without anyone writing them down. That is the answer, and it is older and softer than any wall. The first home was not a structure at all. It was a fire that someone came back to. Everything else follows from that single act, the returning. Once there is a place you return to, you begin to improve it, because it will be there tomorrow, and so will you. You lay a bed. You clear the floor of stones. You burn the old bedding when it turns filthy and lay fresh over the ash. You put something at your back where the wind comes from, and then something better, and then a roof over it. And eventually you are hauling a mammoth's jaw across frozen ground with your hands splitting open, because that patch of ash has quietly become the center of your entire world. And when someone you love dies, you find you cannot make yourself carry them away from it, so you lay them beneath the floor and go on sleeping above them. The hearth came first. The house grew around it, the way it always has, the way it still does. So, when did ancient humans build their first homes? If a home is a shaped structure, raised from parts, then the answer sits at that African lakeside 400,000 years ago, in two pieces of wood notched and fitted at a right angle by hands that were not ours and never would be. If a home is a place tended and cared for, then it is bedding cut and laid and burned and laid again, 77,000 years back, by someone who knew which leaves drove the insects off. If a home is a bed on staying, then it is a dome of mammoth bone rising against the sky of the frozen steppe, 15,000 years ago, built by people who read the land, chose their spot, and refused to move. Every one of those answers is true. None of them is the real one. Because if a home is what we actually mean when we say the word, a place that is yours, that you leave in the morning and return to at dusk, that holds your fire and your family, and finally you're dead, then it began far earlier and far more quietly than any of that. It began hundreds of thousands of years ago, with a patch of ash that somebody walked back to. That is the honest answer, and it is stranger than a date. There was no first house. There was no morning when someone stood back and admired the first roof. There was only a first returning. A moment, unrecorded and unremarkable, when a person who could have slept anywhere chose instead to walk back to the place they slept last night. Everything we have ever built, every wall and door and window and lock, every city on this earth, is the long elaboration of that one small decision. We did not invent the home, we inherited the ache for it and spent 400,000 years building it a body. The man on the step went out in the morning and came back at dusk, and the ring of bone was still standing exactly where he left it. That was the whole miracle, and he would never have called it one. The wall held, the fire caught. The children came in out of the cold and the wind stayed outside where it belonged, clawing at the hides and getting nowhere. He had made a place in the world that waited for him while he was gone. There is nothing in the animal kingdom quite like that. Not a den, not a burrow, not a nest. A den is a hiding place. You go to it because something is chasing you. What he had was different. It was a place that meant something precisely because he came back to it, and because everyone he loved came back to it too. 15,000 years later, the bones are still stacked in that ring, and we crouch over them with brushes and fine tools, trying to work out what they were for. They were for this, so that someone could walk in out of the dark, and feel the wind stop, and know they were home. Every door you have ever closed behind you with relief is the same door. Every time you have come in out of the weather and felt your shoulders drop an inch without deciding to, you have felt exactly what he felt, lying with his back against a wall of mammoth jaw while the storm screamed itself hoarse on the other side. The materials changed. The feeling has not moved an inch in 400,000 years. We are still, all of us, just people walking back to the fire. If the deep origins of the ordinary things we live inside are the kind of story that stays with you, keep close to this channel. There's another one already waiting in the cold, and I'd like you here when the fire catches.